The Nazi dictatorship was responsible for a number of horrifying atrocities during the dark era of Nazi Germany, crimes that went far beyond just political persecution and genocide. Female prostitutes were one of the categories the Nazis targeted. They suffered unimaginable acts of brutality, assault, and degrading treatment. Which forms of violence did they commit against women? How did that turn out in the end? Buckle up as we dive in to find the unspeakable things the Nazis did to the female prostitutes then. Embarrassment and persecution. Nazi philosophy, which placed a strong emphasis on Aryan purity and conventional gender roles, considered sex work unethical and incompatible with these ideals. Female prostitutes suffered a great deal of shame and discrimination as a result. They were stigmatized as asocial or degenerate, imprisoned frequently in concentration camps or special institutions for forced labor, and subjected to social exclusion. Experiments in medicine and forced sterilization. The Nazis embraced the idea of racial hygiene and worked to eradicate individuals they deemed unfit for procreation. Female prostitutes were forcibly sterilized because it was believed that they posed a threat to the purity of the Aryan race. These sterilizations were frequently carried out against the patient's will and were a part of the Nazi regime's larger eugenics program. Additionally, some prostitutes were the targets of cruel medical experiments that resulted in excruciating physical and mental pain, sexual abuse, and violence against women. The Nazi dictatorship treated female prostitutes as disposable objects, and sexual assault was a frequent form of social control and punishment. In concentration camps and military brothels, they were victims of rape, sexual assault, and forced prostitution. These women underwent unspeakable agony and degradation while being deprived of their freedom, dignity, and fundamental human rights. Brutality and torture. The Nazi regime's sadistic tendencies were particularly visible in how it treated female prostitutes. These women were subjected to brutal experimentation and other sorts of torture. They frequently served as test subjects for medical experiments, including ones involving exposure to diseases, chemicals, and high temperatures. Without concern for the subject's survival or well-being, the goal of these studies was to watch how they affected the human body. Forced abortions and infanticide. The Nazis were eager to wipe out any future descendants of prostitution-related women in their quest for racial purity. In certain cases, pregnant prostitutes were made to undergo forced abortions or forced to give birth while being held captive, only to have the children killed shortly after. These deeds showed how little regard the Nazis had for human life and how far they would go to carry out their perverse ideology. Long-term effects of psychological trauma. The physical and psychological harm that the Nazis inflicted on female prostitutes left long-lasting scars. The victims of these atrocities frequently experienced severe PTSD, sadness, anxiety, and other mental health issues. Many struggled to reintegrate into society following their freedom as a result of persistent societal stigma and the frequent rejection of their experiences. Forced prostitution and human trafficking. The Nazi regime actively participated in forced prostitution, taking advantage of the vulnerability of female prostitutes for their own gain. Many women were taken against their will from their homes and nations to work as sex slaves in the Nazi-run brothels that they created. These women's anguish was made even worse by the ongoing sexual violence, exploitation, and degradation they experienced. Female prostitutes were subjected to degrading penalties and public humiliation as a way to discourage them from working in the industry. In front of sizable crowds, they were frequently publicly undressed, beaten, and given harsh and unusual punishments. These actions were done to emphasize the message that prostitution would not be condoned and to serve as a warning to others. Systematic erasure and ignorance. Following the end of World War II, the Holocaust and other significant atrocities became the main subjects of war crimes tribunals and historical record. As a result, many of the sufferings faced by female prostitutes at the hands of the Nazis went unrecognized and unreported. Their experiences and stories were marginalized, leaving many victims without justice or compensation. Legacy and lessons learned. The Nazis' crimes against female prostitutes are a terrifying reminder of the depths of human depravity and the effects of unbridled power. Understanding the potential for the exploitation and persecution of marginalized groups during periods of political extremism requires knowledge of these crimes as well as a sober understanding of their historical context. By acknowledging these crimes, we can work to build a culture that respects and guards the human rights and dignity of every person, support and empowerment of survivors. It's critical to acknowledge the tenacity of the victims of these heinous atrocities. To help these people heal from their traumatic experiences, efforts should be made to empower and support them by giving them access to resources, medical care, and counseling. Raising awareness about the plight of female prostitutes during the Nazi era and aiding survivors in their healing processes can be accomplished by giving platforms for them to speak out and safe venues for them to share their experiences. Fighting modern-day exploitation. The horrifying atrocities the Nazis committed on female prostitutes should be a wake-up call to address and fight modern-day exploitation and brutality against sex workers. Society can endeavor to create an environment that protects vulnerable populations and discourages the repetition of such crimes by advocating for the rights, safety, and dignity of all people involved in sex work. Collaboration of authorities and law enforcement. The Nazis' atrocities against female prostitutes were the consequence of more than just one person's decisions. They also involved the cooperation of authorities and law enforcement. Police and other officials took an active role in the arrest, incarceration, and persecution of these women, which helped to cover up the ongoing abuse they experienced. The involvement of persons in positions of authority highlights how widespread public acceptance and normalization of the mistreatment of prostitutes has occurred. Intersectionality and the targeting of marginalized groups. The Nazis frequently targeted marginalized groups, including women of color, Jews, Roma and Sinti women, and women with disabilities. Because of the intersectionality of their identities, they were even more at risk of being persecuted. Knowing the entire scope of the atrocities committed against these women requires an understanding of the connections between various forms of oppression and prejudice, denial, and historical revisionism. Similar to other aspects of Nazi atrocities, the crimes against female prostitutes have been the subject of denial and historical revisionism. There have been attempts to minimize or ignore the misery that these women endured, which has led to the exclusion of their tales from popular historical accounts. Upholding the truth and paying tribute to the victim's memory depend on combating denial and guaranteeing truthful historical depiction, context, and global responsibility. Examining the crimes the Nazis committed against female prostitutes requires acknowledging the worldwide setting in which these horrors took place. In addition to Germany, other Nazi-occupied countries during World War II also engaged in the exploitation and abuse of prostitutes. The fact that these crimes are committed all over the world emphasizes the joint obligation of the international community to stop future occurrences of these human rights breaches. Gender-based violence and systemic misogyny. Systemic misogyny and the objectification of women were the main causes of the Nazis' persecution of female prostitutes. These ladies were victims of acts that are a severe example of discrimination and gender inequality that permeated the Nazi rule. It is possible to gain understanding of the systemic oppression of women under Nazi authority by recognizing the confluence between gender and the targeting of prostitutes. Healing and restorative justice. It is critical to acknowledge the significance of healing and restorative justice while addressing the atrocities against female prostitutes. In order to help the survivors and their families heal and rebuild their lives after these atrocities, support, resources, and restitution should be given to them. The development of venues for truth-telling, memorialization, and commemoration can also aid in collective healing and the halting of such abuses of human rights. Resistance and resilience. Stories of resistance and bravery are revealed amid the Nazis' atrocities committed against female prostitutes. Some women took part in acts of disobedience, including information smuggling, lending support to other prisoners, or joining clandestine resistance operations. These acts of resistance serve as a testament to the fortitude and tenacity of these women who resisted being marginalized and battled for their survival and self-respect. Legacy of injustice and accountability. The Nazis established a long-lasting legacy of injustice with their crimes against female prostitutes. Many of the criminals responsible for these atrocities avoided capture or received light terms, thus the victims did not receive just compensation. An essential first step in appreciating the significance of these women's suffering and delivering justice for the victims is holding those accountable for the atrocities done against them even after they have passed away. Expanding on these additional aspects, the Nazis' atrocities against female prostitutes were caused by intersectional discrimination, official complicity, and deeply established misogyny throughout the Nazi dictatorship. Society can work towards healing, justice, and preventing the occurrence of such tragedies by embracing these features and overcoming denial. No matter what one's profession or social standing, promoting a more inclusive and just future for all people depends on remembering the past and learning from it. What do you think the Nazis did to the female prostitutes? Leave your answers in the comment section below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you guys soon.